So, common messages. Throw some things out at me. How did you learn about sex? Let's start with, can we start with women? Because I think maybe women and men maybe are a little different typically. And it's good to understand each other. Women? School, the school sex talk. Anybody get left a book on their night table from their mom? Just silently, here's a book. Maybe an awkward talk from mom. Second grade Playboy magazine, that would be me. Anything else? How'd you learn about sex? Maybe you didn't learn? No message at all? Just got married and have fun. Yep. How about messages, and I didn't ask this one, messages from the church about sex? Women. 0. Don't do it. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Any other messages from the church? How about the, if you do it, like, this like picking your flower petals one by one, and by the time you get married, you'll have no flower petals left. Or I've heard women say, if you have sex outside of marriage, you're going to hell. From the church. Okay? So overriding message for women about sex typically is, I would say, don't do it. And the other message I would say is do it for your husband. Your husband needs this. Those are kind of the overriding messages and not a lot of good information. I would say that your message from your mom is very unusual. Like what an awesome thing to have a constant conversation from your mom saying, in marriage, this is a good thing. Okay? Guys, how did you learn about sex? Porn. The barnyard, yeah. Yeah. School, the bus. TV, yeah, TV. Yep. Eating popcorn? The back seat, yes, the back seat. What did you hear from the church about sex? 0. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that we're starting to hear that a little more from the churches, that within marriage, sex is good. My big issue with that is that we hear that message, and for a lot of people, sex is not good, and they're thinking, so I don't get it. Like, how is it supposed to be good? Because it's not good for me. And so we need more information besides just sex is supposed to be good within marriage. Yeah. I suspect that the overriding message for men, even though they didn't get a lot of messages about sex, I think that boys, teenagers, men always somehow knew that sex was going to be the best thing ever. Is that right? Okay, women, do you relate to that message at all? Yeah, scared, like it might hurt. You're going to have to do this. So your husband doesn't stray. That is not the message we got. I think very, very different messages, overriding messages for men and women about sex. Best thing ever. Don't do it for your husband. Okay? That's a drastic difference. Okay? What about lies that the world tells us about sex? Let's just brainstorm a little bit. How about lies about sex within marriage? It shouldn't be talked about. And I think, especially in the church, maybe like we shouldn't talk about sex. Like you can have it, but don't talk about it. Don't talk about it with each other. Don't talk about it with other people. Like we have accountability groups for purity. Should we have accountability groups for having great sex? Like maybe we need to be able to talk about it in good and healthy ways. Okay? What other messages about sex in marriage or lies? Like I think back to the sitcoms and how many sitcoms there was, some husband that was chasing after his wife and his wife was like, ugh. Right? That it was just some guy that was just desperate for sex. All he wanted was sex, and the wife was not interested. That's how it looked in marriage. How did sex look in movies where they were not married? Romantic, hot, everything fell into place. Intercourse with simultaneous orgasm. No mess, no muck. Right? How about messages about what you need to look like to have great sex? Right? You look a certain way, you're a certain age. Yeah, a lot of messages about that. How about messages about men and sex? What? They have to look a certain way too. Yep. They want it all the time. Yeah. And about 30% of the marriages, wives have a higher drive. And you never hear that. And so if a wife has a higher drive or if a husband has a lower drive, right, it's the same thing, you can feel very broken, and yet a lot of times there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not wildly out of balance, right? Yeah. Other messages about sex for men? Yeah, he has to be able to pick her up. Yeah, I think there's a message that men just want sex because they need a release, and they don't really care about the connection. They don't really care about the emotional connection. They don't necessarily even care that much about whether their wife enjoys it. Like he just needs sex. Like I think there's kind of that message. What about messages about women and sex? Yeah, yep. Yeah, they can't, they can't initiate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a message, I'm going to go back to the men. I think there's a message to the men too that's a lie, that you're supposed to know like how to make magic happen for your wife. And if you don't, like there's either something wrong with you or there's something wrong with your wife. Like you should know how your wife works. Like how the heck would you know how your wife works? Like that is the trickiest thing in the world. Okay? And that's a lie that can make a husband feel like he's really failing and insecure, and that is totally a lie. Okay? Other messages about sex. How about messages about sex from the church that are lies? That is dirty. Mm-hmm. If you, I think, especially maybe strong messages to girls, especially if you do that stuff, you're a slut. Like, or if you enjoy sex, you're a slut. Or if, like if you're too wild, you're a slut. Mm-hmm. I think there's a message that if you have sex outside of marriage before you're married, it's going to be awful. And honestly, sex outside of marriage, a lot of times, like it runs on adrenaline, right? You're doing the taboo. It's just like your body can so run on adrenaline that sex before marriage physically can feel really good. And then those same people will get married, and since now they're in this most important relationship in the world, they kind of rein things back right? And I can't be quite that wild or that expressive. I can't really let them know who I am. And all of a sudden, they've confined themselves to this vanilla sex. And they're thinking, why do I hate this? Okay? Or maybe they think, I did all that stuff before marriage. I can't do that now. I can't share what I know. And so they confine themselves to very vanilla sex, and they think, why do I hate this? Or maybe before marriage they did everything but intercourse, all kinds of great foreplay, right? And they loved it, and they could hardly wait to have sex. They could hardly wait to have intercourse. And then they got married, and they had intercourse, and they thought, what's the big deal? And why do I not like this now? Because all of a sudden they aren't doing all of the things they enjoyed before. They can just focus on the main event. And they leave all that foreplay behind. That make sense? Okay. Any other lies about sex that you've thought about? I think there's a lie. I think we hear it in. I think we hear it in youth group, in purity. I think we hear that ultimately, if you want to stay pure and you're a girl, that you have to be the one that controls the gate. Because even if a boy knows that he should not have sex outside of marriage, ultimately he does not have enough control, and he will always push that limit. Okay? And so it sets up the girl as this gatekeeper of, okay, my husband, he doesn't have any control. All he wants is sex. He's going to just keep trying and trying and trying to have sex. And I'm going to be the gatekeeper. And it kind of carries over into marriage. Like it's the same thing. When their husband's reaching for them, they're thinking, he just wants sex again. Okay? And so that message of, ultimately, girls, you are the gatekeeper. If you want to stay pure before marriage, you better be the one to hold that gate. That rolls into our marriage, and we think that our husband now just wants sex. Okay? He's trying to take from us. All kinds of messages impact our ideas and views about sex. And I don't think this is, I don't think it's just a one-time deal of just like recognizing these lies. I think it's a constant battle of asking ourselves, what do I believe about my husband? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my sex? About sex. I remember watching the news, and when there were shows on when they talked about maybe a woman being abused or raped or hurt by a man, I remember going to bed mad at my husband because he was a man. And how can men do those things? Like men hurt women. Okay? And so we need to be really conscious of what we're translating from men onto our husband. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other lies that you guys are dying to share? Okay. So the third thing that we look at in class typically, so we look about how we learn about sex, those messages, both from our family, from the church, whatever, and then we look at lies, general lies about sex and about ourselves, and then we look at how baggage impacts us, because our past experiences can impact us, and we can carry those into our marriage bed. And my transformation, a big part of that, honestly, was sorting through my baggage. And sometimes you don't even realize what you're carrying until you really spend some time thinking through it. And I'm going to just maybe share a little bit of my baggage and ways that I realized that it impacted my marriage, just to kind of show you what this looks like. The first thing was I had a situation that happened. I think I was, second grade, and quite honestly, it was just a child play situation, which are really common, and that's not, it wasn't sexual abuse, it wasn't anything like that. But the deal was that I had never, ever shared with another person what had happened to me in second grade. And that situation held shame over me. And I would say it held shame over me to the point where, like, I felt like I didn't want to be known. Like I didn't want to speak up because what if somebody knew? And it wasn't until about 6 years ago when I was reading, my husband and I were reading a marriage book, and it said, you can't imagine how many women come to talk to me about being abused, and they've never even shared this with my husband. And like mine wasn't an abuse situation, right? It was just a child play shame situation. But I just started crying because I knew that I'd never ever shared this with anybody, and not with my husband. And so I opened up about that situation and shared with him, and we prayed over it, and I wept. And it's amazing how much power things that are in the dark hold over you. And when you bring them to the light, they don't hold power over you anymore. Now, that was a hard thing to do. But what an amazing thing to do, and how much intimacy it created between the two of us, and how much freedom I experienced afterwards after we prayed over it. The other thing that I would share is, and this took me a little while to unravel, but my husband and I, we had sex before marriage. And the deal was, when we started dating, I fell head over heels in love with my husband. And I came home from the first date and told all my roommates, I'm going to marry him. Now, I knew that he had been with a couple of other women, and I was still a virgin at that time. And I decided in my head, if he's going to fall in love with me, then I need to sleep with him. And so I was the one that initiated sex. So that I had resentment for him, even though it was my fault, okay? But the other thing that it did was it left me for years wondering if my husband really desired me. Because I knew, in the back of my head, I knew either he was trying to be a better man and do things different for us, or number two, he did not initiate sex because he didn't really desire me. He didn't really want me. He didn't really think I was beautiful. I was just a good logical choice. Okay? Now you can guess which one I chose. And so for years, I did not feel desired and wanted by my husband. And it took me a while to unravel where that came from. Like, it took me a long time to unravel that. And once I unraveled that, and we've talked about this and we've prayed over it, but my husband's crazy about me. And he's been telling me for years that he's crazy about me. And I believe it. And I know it. Okay? And so going through this baggage has made a huge difference in my life and experiencing freedom in my marriage bed. Because I feel like we fully know each other, and there's nothing left to know, and there's nothing left to hide. And so we get to be completely naked with each other. We share everything. Everything. There's nothing we can't share with each other. It's funny the impact that different baggage has. And I would say some of the typical impacts that I hear from women in class, some of them is the very, very, very strong message, don't do it, 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 get married, it's awful. Okay? And they go for years like that. And being honestly really mad at God. Other women, promiscuity before marriage, and then they get married, and sex is awful, and they can't figure out what's going on, right? And they're still hanging onto that baggage of, well, I can't really have that much fun in marriage because that was outside of marriage, and that was wrong. Okay? And so we hang on to baggage in different ways. Another one, definitely pornography is baggage, right? That impacts our marriage, and it can impact us in different ways. For some guys, if they're struggling with pornography, sex can be this fix that they have to have, right? And they want sex all the time, or they're asking their wives for things that they've seen. And when you're asking your wives for things that you've seen, are you really getting to know each other? Or are you getting to know something else? Okay? Sex is about getting to know each other, not what you've seen. okay? Sometimes the impact from porn is, especially for a husband that's really trying just so very, very hard to stay pure, but maybe is white-knuckling it, right? Is all that stuff that he's seen becomes awful. And so within marriage, he only allows himself to enjoy very strict vanilla sex because all of that is wrong. Now, all of that is not wrong. It's wrong out there. Within marriage, it's good. Okay? And God wants us to experience freedom in marriage. Okay? Even if you've seen it out there. But you've got to deal with that baggage, and you've got to pray over it. And so this freeing ourselves from the baggage, right? First, you got to identify it, and you got to name the impact. How has it impacted you in your marriage bed? Because it's not necessarily about the details of what happened. It's what has it done to me? What has it done to our marriage bed? Why am I not experiencing freedom? Why do I feel the way that I feel? Okay? And then you got to pray over it, and I think you have to pray over it with somebody besides just God. Like James talks about praying with another person, and healing comes. And so that's, like we do that in our groups of women in our class, and I encourage them always, like in general ways that are not going to hurt your spouse, you need to share these things with your spouse. Because getting to know each other means getting to know all of each other, even the muck. Okay? And so in general ways, we can share what happened in the past and how it impacted our past, our present, and we can pray over it together to create intimacy, to gain freedom. And then we need to start taking small steps of freedom and intentional actions and small choices of, baby steps, right? Because sometimes it just takes stepping into it and getting used to things. The last thing that I want to share about, how come sex doesn't seem like that for me? How come it doesn't seem like what all God wants it to be for me? Is how we have sex. And what I mean by this is that we need to redefine sex so that it works for both men and women. And sex, if you look at how sex is portrayed in media, it's very much defined by what works for men, okay? Intercourse works great for men. It does. Like, it's awesome, okay? God gave women a clitoris, and it is not inside the vagina, okay? And so sometimes intercourse doesn't work so great for women. If you just look at statistics, and I'm not going to get into a lot of nitty-gritty details here, so don't worry. But just statistically, I want to just put this out there. For about a third of women, they can experience orgasm during intercourse without any extra stimulation. For about a third of women, they can experience orgasm during intercourse with some extra stimulation. So that might be his hand, her hand, or vibrator. For about a third of women, they may never experience orgasm during intercourse. Okay? Now, God gave us all different ways to connect and have sex. Song of Songs is this wonderful playground of ideas, honestly. Like a kid can read it and they can go, I don't know what that is. And we can read it and we go, oh my gosh, are they talking about that? Yeah, maybe. Like that's why it's written like that. Because those of us that are married can go, oh, are they talking about that? Okay? And so God gives us this playground within the confines of marriage. And so I think that when we're trying to figure out what's right for our own marriage bed, we need to look at a couple of things. One is it something that we're both comfortable with? And two, is it creating intimacy? Are we getting to know each other through this? Okay? Now, if you're doing something because you saw it out there and you're bringing it into here, are you getting to know each other? No. That's the nice thing about like guarding your eyes, right? You're just bringing yourself and your spouse is bringing themselves and you're seeing what can we discover? Okay? And so that just simplifies life. And just because you've seen it out there doesn't mean that you can't bring it into your marriage bed, but you might need to just like pray over that and just like, okay, you want to make sure like this is part of me. This is what we want to enjoy together. And I think that there are a lot of books out there that maybe would say that women don't need to have an orgasm every time. Some people would probably argue with me, but I would argue back. Yeah, and that's true. Like sometimes it's cool to serve each other. But I think if that goes on a regular basis, like I think resentment can build up and things can get pretty tough. And I read one book that was, it was basically a survey of women. Can I say this in church? Okay. And women that masturbated they had an orgasm 95% of the time. Like that's basically every single time. And so women are capable of experiencing pleasure every single time. Okay? Now you may need to expand your definition of what sex looks like because intercourse may not work every single time. Okay? You may need to expand your definition of what, right? Like be willing to go there and be flexible. But I think we're supposed to enjoy it. And a lot of women will say, well, like that's just so much work. Well, is it so much work? Is it work for you, or are you thinking this is too much work for my husband? Because most husbands would tell me, like I'll do anything. Like just tell me and like let me do this. But women tend to kind of be the martyrs. Like, well, I don't know. I'm just too much work. Like we do. And so we kind of hold ourselves back, or we think, well, I can't stop thinking about the laundry, or can't stop thinking about my kids, and let me just like hang on to all this stuff because I'm too worried. I think sex teaches us a lot about our relationship with God. It does. And this being able to let go of control and let go of worry, like God wants us to learn how to do that. He wants us to learn how to do that in our relationship with Him, where we just say, God, okay, just clear my mind of distraction and let me meet with you, God. And He wants us to be able to do it in our marriage bed. God, just clear my mind of distraction. Help me to just enter into this with my husband. God, help me to get on board. Help my body to get on board. Okay? Any questions about any of that? Doing okay? Okay. Okay. So I got just a quick list of how do we create the sex life God desires for us. We talked earlier about having this all-day love affair, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like a Song of Songs is filled with eye to eye. Over and over it says, it talks about the eyes captivating, right? And so that is eye to eye contact. And you know what gets in the way of eye contact? Screens. Phones, computers, iPhones, video games. Like just a huge barrier to eye contact. And we've got to put some boundaries on these. We've got to start looking at each other again. Like this is a big deal. Touch, we talked about that earlier. Thoughts, words. It's got to become this deal where sex rolls out of connection all day, okay? The second thing is being more focused on getting to know each other than on results. We talked about the feeling versus rubbing, right? Like we need to feel each other. We need to experience each other. We need to draw each other back. And I just think sometimes we can have sex where our minds are not actually there enjoying what's going on. And a lot of times it's because our minds are actually worried about, like maybe it's our mind is sitting there worried about, am I going to have an orgasm this time? Am I going to have an orgasm? Or maybe your mind is sitting there worried about, am I doing this right? Or what should I do next? Or what if this doesn't work? Or is she going to have an orgasm this time? Or am I going to last long enough? Or like we begin worrying. And if we're worrying, then are we there and are we enjoying what's going on? Okay? Worry and anxiety is one of the number one causes of any sexual dysfunction. It is, whether it's lack of orgasm for women or lasting not long enough for a man or maintaining an erection or whatever it is. Like, we need to get out of our minds and be there and enjoy what's going on. And so we've got to become less focused on the end result and enjoy what's happening. We've got to enjoy the journey. We need to start talking about sex. And well, here's one thing. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but men are aroused by eyes typically. Women are typically aroused by words and by touch. Okay, that's that non-sexual touch and all of that happens all the time, but words is a huge deal. I don't know if you guys realize this, but just like there's a multi-million-dollar pornography industry, there's a multi-million-dollar erotica industry, which is pornography in words, okay? And all those romance novels that you see at the grocery stores with the naked guys on the front, like, you read those, like, it's sex scene after sex scene. And you think, well, it's easy to have a double standard. It's like, oh, it's great if my wife will read this because then she'll want to have sex. And it works for a little while, and then pretty soon, the two of you are having sex, and your wife is thinking, well, how come he's not like that guy in that book? Like, is that any different than pornography? It's not, okay? And God made us aroused by words, and we need to create that in our marriage, that bed. That means we need to start speaking, not just about sex, like how we do things. We need to be using words for arousal during sex. Kind of a strange concept, I know, okay? But you see it in Song of Songs, okay? Words are arousing for women, and we've got to tap into this. So here are just a few ideas on how to get comfortable talking about sex. My number one recommendation would be, one of the books I use in my class is Sheet Music by Kevin Lehman, and it is great with the nuts and bolts of sex, and it has all kinds of stuff in there, okay? And my number one recommendation, if you're uncomfortable talking with your spouse about sex at all, is just for the two of you to read that book out loud to each other. If nothing else, it gets you comfortable saying those words like penis, vagina, clitoris, orgasm, okay? And you're not having to bring it up yourself. The other thing it does is it puts you on a very neutral platform. So nobody's brought up an issue. You're reading about things and you can say, oh, is that how it is for you? And you can say, yeah, that's totally how it is for me. Or, no, not quite like that, it's like this. And so it puts you on a neutral platform to talk about sex. And so if you're not comfortable talking about sex, that's a great way to start. Another thing that can be really helpful is to just make a list of terms. Because if you're going to be using words in the bedroom, man, they better be words that turn you on, not words that turn you off. And so for some people, the medical terms are a total turnoff. And for other people, there are certain slang terms that they have past experience with, and those are hurtful, okay? And so make a list. Every word you can think of for the man's penis, every word you can think of for the woman's vagina or clitoris or vulva, every word you can think of for any kind of sex, and then you cross off all the turn-offs, okay? And then maybe circle the ones that are turn on and start using those words during sex. The last idea I'll give you for creating communication in the bedroom, I like to call it 2-minute poker. But basically it is, you can play any game. It could be rock, paper, scissors if you want. But you play, and whoever wins that round gets to ask the other person to do something for 2 minutes. And then you play another round, and that person gets to ask the other person to do something for 2 minutes. So, if you're a wife, maybe you need to hear your husband's words. So you say, you know what, for 2 minutes, tell me what you love from my head to my toes. It might be that, as a wife, you just love, you want to be teased more. You know what, for 2 minutes, you get to touch me anywhere on my breast except my nipples. It might be that you want really light touch. You know what? For 2 minutes, touch me just feather light touch, okay? Whatever it is, what it does is you get to practice asking for something in kind of a non-threatening way, right? And just saying those words, do this for me, right? The other person gets to learn what you like, and if you really respond positively, hopefully those things become incorporated into the bedroom, okay? The game tends to ramp up, and it's just a fun, non-threatening way to practice asking for things and using those words and learning things about each other, okay? So that's just another little communication idea. Okay. The fourth thing that we need to do is make sex a priority. And, there are just some practicalities as far as the most common time to have sex is 11 p.m. That's probably like the worst time in the world to have sex. Like, we're dead tired. And even when you have small kids, like even then, like especially then, you're dead tired, right? And so we need to look for other times to have sex. And maybe you have Sunday afternoon is sacred mom and dad time. And at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when the kids are babies, you put them down for a nap, and you guys scurry straight to the bedroom. And you lock the door. And when the kids are older, you know what? This is mom and dad time. You guys get to watch a movie for the next 2 hours. We're going to go upstairs, and we'll see you in 2 hours. And you lock the door, and you go. Now, what an amazing thing for your kids to know, what? We make our marriage a priority, and this is important. It's important for us to have one-on-one connection time. And you can have sex with your kids awake. Okay? And so just the intentionality of making it a priority, having it at other times of the day besides 11 p.m., and even just saving enough energy, right? Because if we don't have enough, there's no magic here. If you have no energy left, you have no energy left. Okay? And so you gotta save some energy for sex. Now, I think that sometimes intentionality leads to craving. Like in our relationship with Christ, like when we get in a groove, when we're just reading the Bible and connecting with God on a regular basis, like when we miss a day, we go, oh my gosh, like I missed that. Like we get to this place where we miss it, okay? And I think that's where we want to get in our marriage and in our sex life, where we're so connected that when we don't have that physical connection, we go, oh my gosh, like I feel disconnected from you. I miss it. I miss you, okay? So we want to get to that place. Now, I think men and women typically have different kinds of drives. Like, especially young men, typically there's a little, like a constant hormonal drive, right? And women maybe kind of have these spikes. Bing, bing, right? Now, should a husband's drive determine when he has sex? No, just because he's driven to have sex doesn't mean he should force his wife to have sex. Should a wife's drive determine when they have sex? No. What if she has no drive? Should it determine when they have sex? No, I don't think so. Like God says, this is something that we need to keep our marriage strong. Now, once you reach menopause, you kind of become a flat line, like you just do. You don't have these spikes anymore. And I think if sex is a huge part of it is in our mind. It is. And we can either decide to be a flat line way down here and just go, well, I'm done. Like I don't have a drive anymore. I don't have hormones saying, go get sex, okay? Or you can decide to be a drive way up here because you want to be so connected. Does that make sense? Okay, don't let your drive determine when you have sex. Number 5 is we need to redefine sex to work for both of us. And I talked about this a little bit earlier as far as in terms of intercourse and how that works for women. I think that sometimes even physical differences and challenges as we age, right? We may go through periods where we need to redefine what sex looks like. And I think maybe Christians make the mistake of of sometimes maybe having a very a narrow definition of what sex is. It's penis and vagina intercourse. I don't know. I don't think so. Like, I think there's all kinds of things. We need to open up that definition. And yeah, I don't know how much we want to go into that, so I'm not going to. You can ask me questions later if you want. Number 6, don't miss the importance of connection during sex to create arousal. I think that men, especially maybe, can operate really well with mechanics. It's the physical motion that creates arousal, that feels good, that creates arousal. Okay, and I think for women that can work too. But I think there's a lot more that maybe that can create arousal than just skin rubbing skin. And it's those connections that we need to tap into and to let those create arousal rather than just mechanics. Okay. And then the last thing is we need to bring God into our marriage bed. And then Stephen talked about this, and this is, I always ask the women, how do we bring God into our marriage bed? I think we can pray. I think praying together in our marriage bed is a great thing. I think, I think we ought to pray about sex. Like, we don't pray about sex a lot. And not just the baggage, but just pray that God would bless your time together. I think sometimes when we have like really great sex, it ought to roll right into praising God. Like, thank you, God, for this amazing connection. Thank you for this gift that you gave us. Okay? And so we need to begin praying about sex in our marriage bed. We read the Bible in our marriage bed to each other, and that's just another way to bring God into it. I think part of it is, you can go to church and you can just show up and worship and you can just leave, right? Or you can go to church and you can experience God and you can sense His presence. Now, is it possible that as we are becoming one, we are supposed to sense the presence of God? Like, that's kind of a strange thing to think about, maybe. But shouldn't we be sensing the presence of God as we become one? Isn't that a good and holy thing? And so a lot of it, honestly, is just mindset. Like, do you close your bedroom door and say, God, you just stay out there and don't look at what we're doing in here. We know that it's good and you created it, but like, don't watch. Or do we bring Him in and He's part of this with us, saying, drink fully.